grandfather left me his clock shop on Delaney Street, the only place that ever felt like home. And 3 days after the funeral, my stepmother changed the locks and handed the keys to her son so he could turn it into a vape lounge. They figured I'd cry into a pillow and let it go, the way I'd let everything go for 20 years. I'm a forensic accountant. Letting things go is not actually my specialty. Stay with me, because what I found buried in 11 years of bank statements turned a fight over a building into something the district attorney is still working on. And before we get into it, I'm honestly curious where you're all watching from today. Drop your city in the comments. I want to be clear about what the shop was, because if you didn't know my grandfather, you'd think this was about real estate. It wasn't. Pop fixed clocks, grandfather clocks, mantel clocks, the kind of fussy little carriage clocks that nobody under 70 owns anymore. He'd opened the place in 1979 with money he saved working nights at a tire plant. And for 40-some years, that narrow storefront in our little Ohio town smelled like brass polish and machine oil, and the peppermints he kept in a dish by the register. When I was 8 and my mother had just died and my dad had no idea what to do with a kid who wouldn't stop crying, Pop handed me a loop and a tray of gears and said, "These have 100 tiny pieces and every one of them matters. Want to see how they fit?" I spent most of my childhood on a stool behind that counter. It was the only place the noise in my head ever went quiet. So 3 weeks ago, I'm sitting in my apartment in Columbus, surrounded by sympathy cards I can't make myself open, and an email comes in from my stepmother, Delphine. Subject line, just one word, shop. My stomach dropped before I even read it, because Delphine has never once written to me about anything that wasn't a problem she decided I was going to solve quietly. The email was short, breezy even. She wrote that she'd given her son the keys so he could get a head start on the build-out, that he was so excited to finally have a real brick-and-mortar location for the brand, and that I shouldn't worry about the old inventory because they were donating the clocks to make room. She signed it Mom, which she has no right to do and never has. I read it twice. The clocks. Pop spent decades on those clocks. Some of them belonged to customers who'd been dead for years and families never came back for. He kept them anyway, wound them every Sunday, because he said a clock that stops keeping time is just a box of regret. And Delphine wanted to donate them to make room for her son to sell flavored nicotine. I called my stepbrother Brett, straight to voicemail, this chipper recording about how he was out building the future. I called Delphine. She picked up on the second ring and I could hear a spin class or something in the background, all bass and a man yelling encouragement. "Oh good, you saw my note," she said. "You gave Brett the keys to Pop's shop." I gave him the keys to the shop, yes. Like I was slow. "Honey, he's launching something real this time. He's got an investor interested. That little building is just sitting there collecting dust, and you live 2 hours away. You've got your fancy job, your apartment. What were you ever going to do with a clock store? Nobody buys clocks. The shop isn't yours to give, Delphine. Pop left it to me. You were in the room when the will was read. You signed the visitor log at the lawyer's office. It's mine." There was that sigh. The long one she's been doing at me since I was 9. The one that means I'm being difficult on purpose. Don't get legal with me. We're family. Your grandfather was an old man who got attached to things. He didn't understand business. I'm trying to do something good for this family, and you're making it about paperwork. It's about Pop's wishes. Your grandfather, she said, and her voice went flat and cold in a way that stopped me, was a sentimental old fool who let a tire plant ruin his lungs and never made a dime he didn't sit on. I knew that man longer than you've been alive. Now I have a class. We'll talk when you've calmed down. And she hung up. I sat there in the dark with the phone hot against my ear, and I thought, she has no idea who she's talking to. She thinks I'm the quiet one, the bookish one, the one who flinches. And for most of my life, she was right. But Delphine forgot 2 things. She forgot what I do for a living. And she forgot that my grandfather, of all people, taught me that the small pieces are the ones that hold everything together. I drove out the next morning. 2 hours up Route 23, the fields going from green to gold, the same drive I'd made 1,000 times as a kid in the back of Pop's truck. When I turned onto Delaney Street, my hands were already shaking, because there, in front of the shop, was a contractor's van, and a banner half unrolled across the front window that said, "Coming soon," in a font that looked like dripping paint. And there was Brett, on the sidewalk, filming himself. He had a phone on a little tripod and he was doing the thing. The gesturing, the "what's up, guys" energy. Walking backward toward Pop's front door while he talked about reclaiming this dead space and bringing some real culture to a town that's been asleep. He'd hung a chain of those plastic pennant flags over the doorway. The peppermint dish, I'd find out later, was already in a trash bag. I parked crooked and got out, and the slam of my car door cut right through his little monologue. He turned around, saw me, and his face did this flicker, the smile freezing. "Oh, hey," he said. "What are you doing here? Mom said you were, processing." "I'm processing fine." I walked past him to the door and put my key in the lock. It didn't turn. I jiggled it. Nothing. The cold went all the way down to my feet. "Yeah, so we had the locks done," Brett said behind me. "Easy as anything. The old ones were sketchy. Insurance thing. You can't be too careful with an investment property." I turned around very slowly. "You changed the locks on my building. It's not really yours yet though, is it? Like legally Mom's handling the estate stuff." He crossed his arms. He was wearing a flannel that still had the fold creases in it and boots that had never seen a job site. "Look, no offense, but you weren't doing anything with this place. You came back like twice a year. I'm actually going to make it into something." "I was here every Sunday for the last year of his life," I said, and my voice came out lower than I meant it to. "Winding the clocks. Where were you, Brett?" His ears went red. "I was busy. I have a brand." I didn't argue. "I'm done arguing with people like Brett. You can't reason someone out of a position their mother put them in." Instead, I took out my phone and I started recording. The new locks, the "coming soon" banner, the contractor's van with the company name on the door, Brett's face going from cocky to nervous, the trash bag by the curb, which I walked over and looked into, and there was the peppermint dish and Pop's hand-lettered hours sign and the tangle of brass pendulums somebody had ripped out and just thrown away. "What are you doing? Stop filming me," Brett said, getting between me and the tripod. "That's weird." "This is my property," I said, "and you're on it without permission, and you've removed and damaged the contents. So yes, I'm documenting it." Then I called the non-emergency line for the county sheriff and reported a trespass and the unauthorized changing of locks on a property I held the deed to. That's when Delphine showed up, because of course Brett had texted her in a panic. She came out of nowhere in her white SUV, parked half on the sidewalk, and got out smoothing her blazer like she was about to chair a meeting. "This is a family misunderstanding, officer," she announced to the deputy who just pulled up before he'd said a single word. The deputy was an older guy named Sokol, who, it turned out, had bought his daughter's first watch from Pop. "These are my children. We're all grieving. There's no need for any of this." Sokol looked at me. "You the one who called, ma'am?" I handed him my ID and the certified copy of the will and the deed, which I had brought because I am the kind of person who brings the deed. This property was left to me. My stepmother and stepbrother entered without my consent, changed the locks, and have been removing and discarding the contents. I'd like them off the property. Delphine's face went through about 4 expressions. "You'd embarrass us like this, over a building." "This is a civil matter mostly," Sokol said. "Careful, but ma'am." To Brett, "If she's got the deed and she wants you out, you're out. You can arrange to get your things another time." "My equipment's inside," Brett whined. "Then you set up a time with me, supervised," I said. Delphine stepped close to me, close enough that I could smell her perfume over the brass-polished ghost still hanging around the doorway, and she said low so the deputy couldn't hear, "You think you've won something. You just started a war you can't afford." and she got in her SUV and pulled away, and Brett scrambled into the passenger seat, and I stood on the sidewalk in front of my grandfather's shop with the locksmith's number already pulled up on my phone. The new lock cost me $300, and the sound of my old key, the original, the one Pop gave me when I was 16, on a little leather fob he'd tooled himself, sliding into a tumbler that finally turned, that sound was worth every penny. Inside, it was worse than the curb suggested. They'd been there maybe 2 days and they gutted it. Display cases shoved against the wall, half of them with the glass cracked. The workbench where Pop did repairs was buried under demo dust. They pulled clocks off the wall and stacked them in a corner like firewood, and a few of the customer pieces, irreplaceable things, were just gone. Worst of all, somebody had started peeling Pop's wallpaper, the soft green he'd hung himself in 79, and underneath you could see the pencil marks where 40 years of kids had been measured against the doorframe. Including me, at every height I'd ever been. I sat down on Pop's stool and I cried, for real, for the first time since the funeral, and then I stopped, because crying wasn't going to fix anything, and I am very, very good at the thing that fixes things. I spent the rest of that day documenting every cracked case, every missing clock, every gouge in the floor, 200 and some photos, and the whole time scrubbing demo dust off the workbench. I kept hearing Pop in my head from a conversation we'd had maybe a year before he died. I was complaining about Delphine Day, some holiday slight, I don't even remember which one, and he set down his loop and looked at me and said, "Your stepmother loves the idea of money more than she's ever loved a single person who has it. Watch her with numbers, kiddo. She's careful with them in a way. Honest people never need to be." I'd laughed it off at the time. Sitting there in the wreckage of his shop, I didn't laugh. Because here's the part Delphine forgot. When Pop's hands started shaking, 3 or 4 years back, he couldn't manage the bills anymore, and Delphine, helpful Delphine, the one with the head for finance, had volunteered to be a signer on his accounts. "Easier if I just handle it," she'd said. And Pop, who trusted everybody, who kept dead men's clocks running out of pure sentiment, had said sure. A week later, the petition arrived, certified mail, the kind you have to sign for. Delphine and Brett, represented by a lawyer named Hollis Mercer, were formally contesting the will. Their claim that Pop had been of diminished capacity in his final years and had been unduly influenced by me, by the granddaughter who came up every Sunday. They wanted the will thrown out and the estate handed to Delphine to administer. I'll be honest, I laughed out loud, alone in my kitchen, this ugly bark of a laugh. They thought this was a sad, messy, emotional family fight. They thought they could out-feeling me. They had walked into a forensic accountant's house and accused her grandfather of being too confused to know what he owned. That's not a fight about feelings. That's a fight about records. And records are the one thing in this world I never lose. I took half my savings, the boring, responsible emergency fund I'd been building since I was 22, and I hired the meanest probate attorney in Central Ohio, a woman named Adaze Oken-Reyes who had a reputation for making opposing counsel cry in depositions. I put the petition on her desk. She read it, then she looked up and a small, frankly alarming smile crossed her face. "Your stepmother is the petitioner," she said. "And she was a signer on the decedent's accounts." "Yes." "And your profession?" "Forensic accountant. I trace where money goes for a living." She set the petition down very gently, the way you set down something you don't want to wake. "Oh," she said. "They have made a mistake. I want a counterclaim for your legal fees and the property damage. But more than that, I want discovery. They put your grandfather's capacity at issue, which means his finances are fair game. I want every statement, every account she touched, going back as far as a judge will let me reach." "How far is that?" "They're arguing he declined for years, so let's look at the years." Her smile widened. "Let's see who was really influencing whom." While Adaze fought Mercer over the subpoenas, and he fought hard, motion after motion to quash, calling it a malicious fishing expedition, I did the part I'm good at. I went home and I pulled 3 banker's boxes off the top shelf of my closet, the ones labeled in my own handwriting, Pop, correspondence by year. Because I'm an archivist of my own life the way I'm an archivist of everything. Birthday cards, the postcards he sent from the one trip he ever took to see the giant clock in Philadelphia, and the letters, dozens of them, in his careful machinist's handwriting, every one dated. There was one from 8 months before he passed. He wrote that he'd gone to see the young Mercer fella's father, Pop's longtime lawyer, the senior partner at the same firm, now representing Delphine, which Adaze said was a conflict so juicy she could barely sit still, and that he'd gotten everything squared away, the shop to you, kiddo, all of it in writing, the way it should be. And then the line that made me put the letter down and walk around my apartment twice before I could read the rest. Don't let your stepmother's noise turn you into someone who doubts what you know. You know that shop. You're the only one who ever really saw it. Saw me too, I think. That letter alone blew a hole in their entire diminished capacity claim. Lucid. Dated. In his own hand. Specific about his intentions. But it was the bank records that turned a will contest into something else entirely. The subpoenas came back in 3 heavy boxes, and Daisy and I spent a Saturday at her conference table going through them, and I want to tell you exactly what I found, because the people who watch these things always ask, what about the money? And I'm not going to leave you hanging the way the universe usually does. Pop's monthly expenses were small, property tax on the shop, and his little house, utilities, his Medicare supplement, groceries. Maybe $2,000 a month, all in, and his Social Security, plus a modest pension from the tire plant, covered it with room to spare. He was not a rich man, but he was a careful one. 40 years of small deposits from clock repairs had built up to something. By the time his hands gave out, Pop had a little over $400,000 across a checking account and a couple of CDs. Here's what the statements showed. Starting about 3.5 years before he died, right around when Delphine became a signer, there was a new automatic transfer. $2,000 on the first of every month out of his checking into a money market account. I, as the executor, had never seen listed anywhere in the estate. Then, starting 2 years ago, a second recurring transfer, $1,500 a month, and then the CDs. As each one matured, instead of rolling over, it got liquidated, and the money vanished into that same off-book account. About $190,000 in transfers, another roughly $70,000 from cashed-out CDs, and the destination account had exactly one other name on it besides Pop's, Delphine's. But that wasn't even the worst of it, and this is the part I want you to understand because it answers the question of where it all went. The money market account didn't just sit there. It funded an LLC, a thing called B. Vandermeer Lifestyle Holdings, registered in Delphine's maiden name, with Brett listed as a member. And that LLC had been paying for things. A leased Audi, 3 failed brand launches, Brett's apartment in a building with a rooftop pool. The very investor pitch deck for the vape lounge had been paid for, I am not making this up, out of my dead grandfather's retirement savings. Delphine hadn't wanted the shop for Brett because she loved Brett. She'd wanted it because she needed me, the executor, to never look closely at the estate. If she could get herself appointed administrator, she could close the books her way. Giving Brett the shop, donating the clocks, declaring it all worthless, that was the cleanup. She was trying to bury a decade of theft under a coat of paint and a banner that said, "Coming soon." The first real confrontation didn't happen in a courtroom. It happened at a mandatory mediation, in a beige conference room with bad coffee. The air so tense you could have snapped it. Me and Adiza on one side, Delphine, Brett, and Mercer on the other. Delphine in armored gray. Brett tapping his nails on the table until Mercer hissed at him to stop. Mercer opened smooth as oil. My clients are prepared to be generous. A cash buyout. Let's put a number down, sign, and spared everyone the unpleasantness. A Daisy didn't even look at him. She looked at Delphine. We're not here to discuss a buyout. We're here to tell you we're proceeding to trial. And we're counterclaiming legal fees, repair costs, and punitive damages for a petition filed in bad faith. Bad faith, Delphine snapped, the composure cracking at the corner. I am trying to protect this family from a girl who isolated my father-in-law, and you were a signer on his accounts, I said. My voice was steadier than I expected. Weren't you, Delphine? The room went quiet. To pay his bills, she said, which I did out of the goodness of his bills ran about $2,000 a month. I slid the first summary sheet across the table. Just dates and numbers. Clean. So I'm trying to understand why. Every single month for 3.5 years, an additional $2,000 left his checking account on the first. And why, 2 years ago, another $1,500 a month started leaving on top of that. Brett, for the first time, looked up from his phone, his forehead creasing. What's she talking about? Delphine didn't touch the paper. Her hand had gone white-knuckled around the strap of her bag. And I'm trying to understand, I went on, sliding the second sheet over, where his CDs went when they matured, because they didn't roll over, they were cashed out. And all of it, the transfers, the CDs, about $260,000, ended up in a money market account that wasn't in the estate, an account with your name on it. Funding an LLC, funding, I looked at Brett, your car, your apartment, your brand. Brett's mouth fell open. Mum, what is she? He looked at the second sheet, at the line item for the leased Audi. You said that was from the investor. You said, be quiet, Brett, Delphine hissed. But he wasn't looking at her anymore. He was looking at the paper, and then at me, and something was reorganizing itself behind his eyes, the way it does when a person realizes the story they've been living in was written by somebody else. Mercer was already on his feet. This is wildly improper. This is a probate matter, not it's theft, I said. The words landed in the middle of the table and just sat there. You've been stealing from your father-in-law for years, and when he died you panicked, because the granddaughter who was about to read the books happens to do this for a living. Delphine stood up so fast her chair screeched. You ungrateful little, after everything I did, you were always his favorite, always up there whispering in his ear, turning him against me. I wasn't whispering anything, I said. I was winding clocks. You were the one at the bank. She didn't deny it. That's the thing I keep coming back to. A person who'd been falsely accused of stealing $260,000 from a dead man would have screamed that it was a lie. Delphine screamed that I was ungrateful. The mediator, a mild little man who'd said nothing the whole time, cleared his throat and said he thought the mediation was over. Mercer grabbed Delphine's elbow and steered her out. Brett trailed behind them, and at the door he stopped, and he looked back at me, and he didn't say anything. But he looked back. Within the week, Mercer filed to withdraw as counsel irreconcilable differences, which is lawyer for I'm not going down with this. Delphine hired a criminal defense attorney, which tells you everything, and he advised her to plead the fifth on every financial question in the civil case. In probate court, pleading the fifth might as well be a confession. Cornered, she got petty. The padlock on the shop's back storage room got cut. Someone keyed my car in my own apartment lot 2 hours away. I got a string of blocked calls at 3 in the morning that were just breathing, and then a click. It was desperate and stupid, and all of it landed on the trail cameras I'd had installed around the shop the day after the mediation. Because I am, again, the kind of person who installs the cameras. The trial was in a small, stuffy courtroom that smelled like radiated dust. Daisy had our table organized into a fortress of labeled binders. Delphine sat with her grim new lawyer, the polish all gone, just something brittle left. She wouldn't look at me. And then, right before the judge came in, the doors opened and Brett walked in. He was in a plain dark suit, no flannel, no tripod. He stopped in the aisle. He looked at his mother, and Delphine gave him a tiny, sharp shake of the head. Sit with me, it said. And Brett took a breath, and he walked past her and he sat down in the row behind me. Behind me. I heard Delphine make a sound like she'd been hit. The judge was a woman with reading glasses and zero patience, and a daisy was surgical. She established the will's validity through the testimony of the senior Mr. Mercer. Yes, the same firm. And the judge's eyebrows climbed clean up her forehead at that conflict. She demolished the diminished capacity claim with Pop's doctor, who confirmed he was sharp to the end, and with the bound book of his letters, dated and lucid, his own words about the shop and about me. And then she turned to the money. Your Honor, Adaisi said, the petitioner put the decedent's financial vulnerability at issue. We agree he was vulnerable. We simply disagree about who exploited it, and she laid it out. The signer status, the off-book account, the transfers, the CDs, the LLC, the Audi, the rooftop apartment, statement by statement, and with every exhibit, Delphine sank an inch lower in her chair. Then Adese called Brett. His own mother's lawyer objected. The judge waved him off. Brett took the oath with his hands shaking, and Adese asked him gently about B. Vondermeer Lifestyle Holdings, and Brett told the truth, that his mother had set the company up, that she'd handled all the money, that he'd been given an allowance and told it was investor capital, that he was the talent and she was the business, that the Audi, the apartment, the brand launches, all of it ran through accounts he never saw the bottom of. And did you know, Adesa asked, that the money was coming from your grandfather's retirement savings? No. Brett's voice cracked. He was crying now, this big guy in a borrowed-looking suit, tears just running. I swear I didn't. She told me it was hers. She told me Pop would have wanted me to make something of myself. He looked at me full on for the first time in years. He loved that shop. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. The judge let the silence hang. Then she looked at Delphine over her glasses and said, in a voice gone very quiet, Counsel, does your client have any explanation for these records? Anything at all she'd like to say before I refer this file to the district attorney? Delphine's lawyer stood and said his client would be exercising her Fifth Amendment rights. The judge nodded slowly. I see. She squared the papers in front of her. In the matter of the petition to contest the will of the decedent, I find the petition frivolous, malicious, and filed in bad faith. It is denied. The will stands. The shop on Delaney Street and all its remaining contents are the sole property of the petitioner's stepdaughter. She kept going. I am awarding her legal fees in full, plus punitive damages in the amount of $75,000 for the grotesque nature of this filing. And then she set down her pen. Furthermore, in my capacity as an officer of this court, I am referring the entirety of this record, every statement, every transfer, every account, to the district attorney's office for immediate criminal investigation into financial exploitation of an elderly adult and grand theft. She looked at Delphine, who had gone the color of paper. You slandered a dead man to hide what you took from him while he was alive, and you used his own grandson to do it. It's the most contemptible thing I've seen in this room in a long time. We are adjourned. The gavel cracked. Delphine didn't move. She just stared at the table. The collapse was fast and total. 11 days later, she was arrested. Not at the bank. She never worked at a bank. That's the thing I want to correct, because people assume she had some position. She was just an ordinary woman who'd gotten signature authority and a guilty conscience. Arrested at her kitchen table, by all accounts, while Brett was at the new job he'd taken bussing tables. He'd cooperated fully with the DA, gotten immunity for his testimony, and was now, for the first time in his adult life, paying his own rent on a real one. The Audi went back. The LLC dissolved. The vape lounge investor evaporated the second he heard the words elder financial abuse and the money. People always want to know about the money. The DA froze what was left in the off-book account, and the probate court ordered it returned to the estate, which meant to me, the executor and sole heir, it didn't make me whole. Most of it was already spent on a leased car and a rooftop pool and 3 brands nobody bought, but a chunk came back. I put the punitive damages and the recovered funds toward one thing. I hired a restorer, a real one, an old craftsman 2 towns over who'd known Pop. It took him a month to strip the wallpaper somebody had started peeling, and underneath we found the pencil marks intact. Every height of every kid Pop ever measured, including a faint one near the bottom that said my own initials, and the year I turned 9, the first summer after my mother died. The summer he taught me about gears. I had the restorer seal it, under glass, instead of repapering over it. It's the first thing you see now when you walk in. I tracked down the families of the customer clocks that were missing, the ones Brett's contractor had hauled to a scrapyard, and I paid out of my own pocket to replace what I could. And I wrote letters of apology in my grandfather's name to the ones I couldn't. I rewound every clock that survived. The shop ticks again, all of it slightly out of sync, 100 small sounds that don't quite agree, which Pop always said was the most alive a room could be. Brett came by once, a few months later. Stood in the doorway in his bussing apron like he wasn't sure he was allowed in. "I'm working at the diner on 5th, he said, like a confession. I told him that was honest work. He looked around at the ticking clocks and the glass case with the pencil marks under it, and he said, I didn't know about the marks. I said, I know. We're not fixed, Brett and I. It isn't a fairy tale. But it's honest now, which is more than it ever was, and honest is a thing you can build on. Delphine's trial is set for the spring. The DA tells me the case is, in his words, not complicated, which is what they say when the paper trail does the talking. I don't know if I'll go. People assume I'm hungry to watch her get sentenced, and I understand why, but my peace isn't in that courtroom. It's here, in this narrow room that smells like brass and machine oil, where I'm sitting on Pop's stool with a loop in my hand and a carriage clock open in front of me, 100 tiny pieces laid out on a tray, every one of them mattering, every one of them mattering, every one of them finally back where it belongs.